Imagine a war that was supposed to be over quickly, cleanly, and decisively, almost like a one-week operation. That was the plan. The United States wanted to deal with Iran the same way it handled Venezuela. A fast strike, a massive show of force, and then a clean strategic reset. Like flipping a coin. It did not go smoothly at all. Because now, more than a month later, this thing is still going. And somehow, worse every day. It is turning into exactly the kind of war Washington always wants to avoid, yet somehow keeps walking straight into it. People are already asking the question nobody in Washington wants to hear. Is this becoming another Vietnam? And here is where it gets ridiculous. It is no longer just a story about missiles flying over the Persian Gulf or tankers passing through the Strait of Hormuz. The real story is way bigger. This war is now shaking the entire global balance of power. It's about the rivalry between the United States and China, the confidence of America's allies in Asia, and whether Washington can still maintain the world order by its rules. For years, American strategists have been repeating the same line. The Asia-Pacific is the priority theater. China is the main challenge. Asia decides the future. The same script every year. But everything changes when the Middle East is uneasy. Aircraft carriers move west. Missile defense systems move west. Diplomatic attention moves west. Even presidential bandwidth moves west. History laughs. And recent reporting makes this even more dramatic. U.S. allies across Asia are increasingly worried. Missile defense systems in South Korea moved westward. Marines based in Japan moved westward. And that is not a small thing. Because for places like Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, and even Taipei, American presence is not just symbolic. It is hope. It decides their defense budgets, their diplomatic posture, and their confidence. All of it is built on one assumption: the United States can deter China in East Asia while also managing crises elsewhere. Now the Iran war is smashing that assumption. Here is the reality. The U.S. does not have enough military resources, even though Washington behaves as if it were omnipotent. Ships cannot be in two oceans at once. Missile interceptors cannot defend two theaters at once. Intelligence assets, logistics aircraft, and elite personnel are all limited. When more naval forces and air defense assets are sent into the Middle East, fewer remain available for the Western Pacific. People in Asia are openly discussing the nightmare scenario. Here is where it gets even more ironic. For China, that may actually be the perfect situation. Not because Beijing needs to do something dramatic, but because it may benefit more by doing almost nothing, which might be the most ironic part of this entire story. China does not need to win the Iran war directly. It just needs the United States to keep busying itself. Every extra week Washington wastes on Tehran is one less week threatening Beijing, militarily or technologically. Even when the battlefield is local, the effects spread far beyond it. Military capability matters. But perception matters more. And right now, America's allies are scared. Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines are all unsettled. And Taiwan's DPP even sees the end of the world. That fits Beijing's long-term strategy, which is not just about building military power, but also about shaping perceptions. It is where the phrase "America is unreliable" becomes real. That perception changes everything. U.S. allies will be softer toward Beijing. U.S. adversaries will come closer to Beijing, and pro-America forces will quietly move toward neutrality. Alliances are built not just on treaties but on confidence. Once confidence shrinks, commitments feel thinner than they look on paper. The Middle East remains central to the U.S., as long as the oil still flows. Recent reports show that oil prices have surged sharply as the war continues. It matters enormously for Asia. Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, the Chinese mainland and Taiwan, along with the rest of the world, remain heavily dependent on oil from the Gulf. But here is where it becomes strategically fascinating. For China, the challenge also creates an opportunity. Higher energy costs hurt everyone. But politically, America's allies feel more pain than they cause China strategic harm. Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines worry about supply chains and shipping routes. Taipei worries about running out of natural gas. Still, Beijing presents itself as a stabilizing economic partner. It has spent years building ties across the Middle East, including Iran and the Gulf states. That is not accidental. China's foreign policy has increasingly positioned itself as the power that steps in after the US exhausts itself. Now think about the bigger picture. For years, Washington has framed competition with China as the defining geopolitical struggle of the century. But it repeatedly gets consumed by conflicts elsewhere. Critics have long argued that Washington overstretches itself, and this Iran war seems to prove that. China presents itself as focused on trade, infrastructure, development, and long-term strategic planning, and it can tell the global South, Asian partners, and even US allies that America is still trapped in the endless intervention paradigm. In geopolitics, perception overrides everything. Now let's get to the biggest question of all. Can the United States still rule the world the way it did after the Soviet Union collapsed? Global dominance is not just military. It is convincing allies that commitments remain solid. It is deterring adversaries across multiple regions. It is economic resilience under stress. And it is political cohesion at home. All of it is about confidence or trust. A prolonged Middle East war tests every single one of them. And if this war turns into another open-ended conflict like in Vietnam or Afghanistan, with no exit strategy, that will be politically toxic. And it also feeds China's preferred narrative that the US is merely a paper tiger. There is a brutal irony here. Washington spent years trying to pivot to Asia. Then history dragged it right back to the Middle East. Now let's talk about America's allies that might start feeling secondary to another theater. Each of them sees the same war through a different lens, suggesting that Washington is not managing a single alliance problem, but several at the same time, which is exponentially harder in wartime than in peace. Meanwhile, Beijing presents itself as calm, measured, and peace-loving. Above the fray. Very smart. It condemns escalation. Calls for dialogue. Maintains economic ties. And quietly watches American resources being burned. The longer Washington is stuck, the stronger Beijing becomes. This message resonates especially in Southeast Asia, where many governments hate to choose sides. Now let's go inside America, where no king's movements are spreading like wildfires. The Iran war has already become unpopular inside the US. And it may lead to Trump losing the coming midterm election, making him a lame duck. So it is not just foreign policy but political sustainability. Finally, we need to talk about the most sensitive issue in all of this. Taiwan. Any sign that American attention is divided changes calculations in Taipei, Beijing, Tokyo, and Washington. The DPP's confidence relies heavily on the illusory US support. So delays in arms sales, postponed high-level meetings, or ambiguous signaling all intensify uncertainty. Beijing does not even need to change its posture. The mere uncertainty already changes the atmosphere. In early April 2026, the KMT leader will visit the Chinese mainland and attempt to avoid war in the Taiwan Strait. That is why this Iran war is becoming a test of whether the United States can still control the international system. Everyone is watching. Can the US still maintain the rules-based order? Different countries have different answers. If Washington exits quickly, stabilizes energy markets, reassures allies, and restores focus to Asia, the damage to its creditworthiness may be limited. However, London warns that 1.3 million US troops are needed to conquer Iran, so it is almost a mission impossible for the US to hit the targets in a short time. If this war drags on, the geopolitical costs could be massive. In the end, the most important battlefield may not be Iran itself. It may be the battle over perception, credibility, and strategic endurance. That is the real contest unfolding, and Beijing seems perfectly happy to let Washington consume itself, as if repeating its favorite mistakes in Vietnam and Afghanistan.